Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In the previous episode, we witnessed two completely different paths in life, like two roads gradually separating over time, yet somehow placed side by side so that the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. On one side was Tieu San, a woman who had gone through difficult days, slowly standing up again, learning, practicing, nurturing her dream of becoming a chef, and rebuilding her future with her own hands. Beside her was Hoai, the one who didn't just appear as support, but quietly stayed, listened, and gave her enough trust to keep moving forward. And on the other side, the family of Tieu San's ex-husband fell into a completely opposite situation. Mistakes, careless decisions, slowly led to consequences. When his mother was scammed out of 150 million, everything seemed to begin slipping downhill. Debt was no longer just numbers, it became a heavy burden pressing on the entire family. The atmosphere, already unstable, grew even more suffocating. Day by day, the risk of losing everything was no longer distant, but clearly present right in front of them. And then, after everything that had happened, the story continued on a very ordinary day. No major incident. No unexpected event. Just a day like any other, yet carrying emotions that were hard to name. Tieu San decided to visit Trang and the baby. That decision came very naturally. Not out of obligation. Not because of any specific reason. But simply, she wanted to go. Wanted to see the child. Wanted to ask how they were doing. Even though the connection they once had was no longer the same. Even though the past could not return. Deep inside her, there was still something very light. A quiet kind of care. Not too clear, but enough to lead her there. That familiar road had not changed. Everything looked the same. But the feeling as she walked was no longer like before. No awkwardness. No heaviness. Just a calmness. Though inside, her steps still slowed slightly. When Tieu San arrived, Trang came to open the door. A smile appeared. Not too forced. But not completely comfortable either. It was a smile. With effort. With restraint. And with many things left unsaid. The two of them looked at each other for a brief moment. But it was enough to feel many things. The initial atmosphere remained gently balanced. No one brought up the past. No one reopened old stories. Everything stayed at a safe distance. Enough to avoid making the other uncomfortable. Tieu San stepped inside. The familiar space appeared before her. Everything was still the same. Yet something felt different. A silence that was slightly too heavy. A sense of emptiness. Even though there were still people in the house. Tieu San's gaze paused on the baby. The child was still so small. Still innocent. Unaware of everything happening around. She stepped closer. Her eyes softened. A quiet warmth appeared naturally. She didn't say much. Just looked. Just gently observed. As if wanting to hold on to that moment a little longer. Meanwhile, Trang remained standing there. Her eyes fixed on Tieu San. The smile still lingered. But didn't last long. The heaviness slowly became clearer. Without words. It could still be felt. Something was weighing on her thoughts. The room remained quiet. But not a comforting silence. It was a pause. Filled with things yet to be spoken. Tieu San noticed it too. She didn't ask immediately. Didn't rush. She simply sat down, letting everything slow down, as if waiting for the other person to open up. Because sometimes the hardest things to say don't need to be forced. They just need time to find their way out. And within that space, two people who once shared a connection, who went through complicated stories together, now sat facing each other in a very different situation. No longer the past, no longer bound by old ties, only very real emotions, yet difficult to name. And perhaps within that silence, something was about to be said. A story, not ending, but simply continuing in a different way. After a few words of greeting, the atmosphere gradually slowed. The initial conversation only revolved around simple, everyday things, but it couldn't last for long. Because behind those gentle questions, there were still heavy matters that neither of them could avoid forever. Trang began to speak. Her voice no longer held the lightness from before. It became slower, lower, and somewhat broken, as if every sentence required effort to come out. She didn't look directly at Tieu San at first. Her gaze sometimes dropped, sometimes drifted elsewhere. But then, the story was still told. Trang spoke about her family situation, without too many details. Just a few sentences, but enough for anyone to understand how serious things had become. The debts were no longer small numbers. They were piling up, not little by little, but continuously, without pause, without time to adjust. Each passing day, the pressure grew heavier. The atmosphere in the family was no longer the same. Everything became tense, heavy, and it seemed no one could remain calm anymore. Trang said. Tieu San's ex-husband had just bought a car on installment. A decision that before had likely been considered, seen as progress, a change, a new beginning. But before anything could stabilize, the crisis happened. So fast that no one could prepare. His mother was scammed out of 150 million. Not a small amount, especially in their current situation. That money was not just a loss. It dragged along many consequences. There was no money left to manage things. No source to compensate. Previous debts had not yet been resolved. And now, interest kept accumulating. Debt upon debt. Pressure upon pressure. Everything was gradually slipping out of control. The risk of the bank seizing assets was no longer distant. It was approaching day by day. Clearly present. Like something unavoidable without a solution. And what made it even harder was that the person responsible had disappeared. Without explanation. Without a trace. Leaving behind all the consequences. People who had to bear them. A family slowly falling into despair. Hearing that, Tieu San remained silent. Not because she didn't understand, but because she understood too well. Every word Trang said didn't need to be many. Yet it clearly conveyed the pressure they were facing. She sat there. Didn't react immediately. Didn't interrupt. Just quietly listened. Her expression didn't change much. But inside, So many things were happening. She was no longer part of that family. That was the truth. The connections from before were no longer the same. The wounds that once existed could not completely disappear in such a short time. Some memories, even if not mentioned, still remained somewhere inside. Not clear, but impossible to deny. And because of that, this moment became difficult to respond to, because she stood between two emotions. One side was the past, the things that had once hurt her. The other side was the present, people who were now in difficulty. And in between was herself, no longer belonging to either side, but not completely detached either. Inside her, but she couldn't agree immediately either, because any decision at this moment needed to be thought through carefully. Finally, she spoke gently, her voice calm, not cold, but not too soft either. I don't have much right now. A very honest sentence, without avoiding, without embellishing. But let me check. I'll see how much I can gather and let you know. No promises. No specific amount. Just an opening. A way to not take away hope, but also not put herself in a difficult position. Trang nodded. Didn't ask further. Didn't pressure. Because she understood. That was the best Tieu San could say at that moment. Even without a clear answer. At least, there was still a bit of hope. A chance. Small, but still there. The conversation slowly came to an end. No more words. No clear change. But the emotions felt heavier than before. As she left, Tieu San stepped outside. The space returned to silence. The road ahead looked the same. But inside her, nothing felt the same anymore. She carried many thoughts. Unclear. Unarranged. Just overlapping emotions. Between reason and feeling. Between the past and the present. And perhaps the answer could not come just yet. That evening, the space grew quieter. After a long day filled with unanswered thoughts, Tieu San returned home, but the heaviness from the earlier encounter still lingered within her. Trang's words, her expectant eyes, the difficult situation, everything echoed somewhere in her mind, impossible to push aside so quickly. She sat down. Not in a rush. Not starting immediately. As if she needed a little more time to sort through everything in her head. And finally, she told Hai everything. From beginning to end. Leaving nothing out. From the situation of her ex-husband's family. The mounting debts. To Trang's hesitant request to borrow money. Her voice was steady. Slow. Not overly emotional. But not light either. Because what she was saying was not something simple. She also made it clear that she wanted to help. Not out of obligation. Not because she was forced. But because, deep down, she couldn't turn away. Even though the past had closed. Even though the wounds were still there. Standing before the present situation. She couldn't be cold enough to ignore it. But what made her hesitate was not the decision of whether to help or not. It was Hai. She was afraid. Afraid he would be upset. Afraid he would misunderstand. Afraid he would think that she was still tied to the past. That this act of help was not simply kindness, but a connection not fully cut off. Those thoughts, she didn't hide them. She said them out loud. Honestly, but carefully. Because to her, the understanding between them was more important than anything else. The room fell silent for a moment. No immediate reaction. No rushed answer. Just a pause. Enough for everything to settle. And then, Hai spoke. His voice was not loud, not judgmental, and without hesitation. After all, she's Ivy's grandmother. He spoke slowly, clearly. And he's still her father. A truth that could not be changed. We can't just watch them fall apart and do nothing. His sentence ended. Gently, but with certainty. It wasn't an impulsive decision, but a thought that had been considered. A choice coming from understanding, and from who he was. Tieu San looked at him. Her gaze paused slightly. A bit surprised. Not because she didn't hope for it, but because not everyone could think that way. Not everyone could put themselves in someone else's position to make such a decision. In that moment, she said nothing, but her emotions were clear. A sense of relief, gratitude, and above all, trust. Hai didn't just understand what she said. He understood even what she hadn't yet put into words. He didn't look at the past. Didn't let what had happened affect the present. But chose to focus on what needed to be done now. And then, a decision was made. Without long discussion. Without debate. Without further hesitation. Everything happened naturally, as if both of them had already been looking in the same direction. The next day, Hai and Tieu San went to meet her ex-husband. This meeting was very different. No tension. No heavy glances. No sense of confrontation. Instead, there was silence. A silence filled with exhaustion, with pressure, clearly shown on the man's face. He no longer looked like before. No confidence. No firmness. Instead, signs of sleepless days. Unresolved thoughts. Unbearable pressure. The conversation didn't begin with unnecessary words. Hai spoke first. Short. Clear. He offered an amount of money. 50 million. Not a large sum, but enough to help at this moment. He didn't say it was a gift. Nor did he create pressure. He simply made it clear. Consider it a loan. His voice was calm. Without comparison. If you can, pay it back. No binding. No force. But enough to keep things clear. But more importantly, he paused slightly, looking straight ahead. You have to stand up. Not blame, but a reminder. You have to start again. A request, but also an opportunity. And you have to become a real father to Ivy. That final sentence was not heavy, but it touched the core. At that moment, everything seemed to pause. Tieu San's ex-husband couldn't speak. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he didn't know what to say. That silence was not avoidance, but emotion. His family also said nothing. No one expected. After everything that had happened, after all the difficult times, Tieu San could still stand here, without resentment, without holding on to the past, but choosing to help, calmly, clearly, not out of obligation, but because she chose to. Gratitude was visible in everyone's eyes. No need for many words. Yet everyone understood. They were thankful, not just for the money, but for how they were treated. A kindness that came at the hardest moment. A compassion not everyone could offer. And through all of this, Hai stood beside her, not as an outsider, but as a companion. Someone who didn't just love Tieu San, but stood with her in making the right choices. Not only through words, but through actions. And perhaps, it was that unity that made everything more meaningful. A story, not just about helping, but about how people choose to treat each other after everything they have been through. But after everything that has happened, after the decisions made without hesitation, after the help that seemed enough to change everything, will things truly move in a positive direction? That amount of money, though not small in this situation, though it came at the moment they needed it most, but is it really enough to help them get through? Or is it only a short pause? A moment for everything to settle, before new pressures come crashing in again?
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Hôm nay thì mình đang làm video về câu chuyện Tiểu San và diep. Mọi người đợi một tí nữa để mình có viên thuốc này. Cảm ơn mọi người rất nhiều vì đã theo dõi và ủng hộ cho video của mình nhé. Bây giờ thì mình đã làm xong rồi nhưng mà còn phần tiêu đề với lại ấy nữa. Cảm ơn mọi người, hẹn gặp lại mọi người